The letter arrived on a Tuesday, thin as a prayer and just as heavy. I recognized the logo before I opened it, and my hands started to shake anyway. When I read the words, "Your application has been received," my living room suddenly felt like a room I was only borrowing. I'm Eleanor Whitaker, 67 years old, and I've learned there are betrayals that don't slam the door. They close it softly, with a smile, so you don't notice until the air runs out. That morning smelled like burnt toast and lemon cleaner. I had been wiping fingerprints off the coffee table the way I always did when Michael said he might stop by, little habits that make you feel needed. The sunlight came through the lace curtains Robert and I bought back in '84 after he got that bonus from the plant. The lace is thinning now, like everything else, but it still softens the world. I set the kettle on, listened to it hiss, and sorted through the mail with my reading glasses perched on the end of my nose. Electric bill, a pharmacy receipt stapled to a coupon for vitamins, a bank statement I didn't really want to look at, and then that envelope, official and plain, my full name typed neatly as if it belonged to someone else. I sat down before I opened it. My knees have been telling me the weather since Robert passed, and they don't like surprises. The paper inside was crisp. It thanked me for my interest in a community living arrangement and confirmed I had been placed on a waiting list. There was a reference number, a contact person, and a paragraph about estimated time frames. 2 years, possibly more. It even included a brochure with smiling seniors holding paintbrushes, as if a bright cardigan could make up for being filed away. I read it twice, slow the second time, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there it was again, in polite language. Someone had started the process of moving me out of my own life. My tea whistle screamed from the kitchen, sharp and offended. I turned it off, poured the water, and watched the steam rise like a spirit leaving a body. I couldn't taste anything. My mouth had gone dry, and my heart thumped in that ugly, uneven way it does when fear puts on a Sunday dress and pretends to be reasonable. Michael had promised me. He stood right where I was sitting now, last spring, after my fall in the grocery store parking lot. I'd tripped over a cracked curb and bruised my hip so badly the purple lasted weeks. He brought me soup in a plastic container and looked at my kitchen the way young people look at old things, half pity, half impatience. "Mom, you don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice gentle as if kindness could substitute for time. Susan stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding like a judge who'd already decided. I remember the exact sentence Michael used because I repeated it to myself the way you repeat a hymn when you're scared. "I'll take care of you. You're my mother." After Robert died, I tried not to be a burden. Widowhood teaches you to fold yourself smaller. I learned to stretch canned soup with extra water, to cut pills in half when the copay jumped, to keep the thermostat at 66, and wear 2 sweaters. I'd been a school secretary for 30 years, steady and invisible, the kind of woman who knows how to file a form so it doesn't get lost. I knew how to survive on less, and I knew how to smile while doing it. I also knew how much Michael and Susan had been struggling. Their mortgage, the daycare, Michael's car payment. The first time Susan hinted they could use help, it was wrapped in compliments. "You're so good with numbers," she said, sliding a folder across my table. "You always kept everything organized. Could you just look at this?" Inside were printouts of their bills, a credit card statement, and a late notice from the electric company. I spent an afternoon with my calculator and a yellow legal pad, writing down due dates and amounts. It felt good, in a small way, to be useful again. After that, there were more folders. More, "Just a quick question, Eleanor." More envelopes pushed toward me with my name on them, as if that made everything safer. Susan would talk while I signed, her voice bright, her perfume a little too sweet. Michael would kiss my forehead and call me Mom, and I'd tell myself that family was supposed to be a little messy. But this letter wasn't messy. It was clean. administrative, final, in a way only paperwork can be. I picked up my phone and stared at Michael's contact photo, him holding little Daisy at the pumpkin patch, both of them grinning, cheeks flushed. My thumb hovered. Then I put the phone down. Instead, I looked back at the letter and noticed something I hadn't seen at first, something small that made my stomach tighten. The application date was 3 weeks ago. Not last spring, not after my fall. 3 weeks ago, while Michael had been texting me heart emojis and asking if I'd made it to my checkup. A sound came from my front porch then, the creak of the step. For a moment, I thought it might be Michael, arriving with that practiced concern. But it was only the wind nudging the hanging planter Robert loved, the dried stems rattling like old bones. I turned the brochure over in my hands. The paper was glossy, expensive. Someone had taken time to request it. To fill in my information, to imagine my absence. My name, my birthday, my address, all the pieces of me arranged neatly on a form. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Outside, a car passed with its radio faintly playing. Ordinary life kept moving, indifferent as ever. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table beside my bank statement, my pharmacy receipt, my unpaid electric bill. For years, I'd believed love was proven in grand promises. Sitting there in my quiet house, I began to understand something harder and truer. Promises are easy. Paper is what people use when they mean it. I didn't call Michael that first day. I took the letter to the kitchen sink like it was something that could leak, and I held it under the bright light above the stove. The paper smelled faintly of printer ink and someone else's office. My name sat there in perfect type, and it made me feel strangely naked, like my age and my worries had been entered into a system I'd never agreed to join. I did what old secretaries do when the world tilts. I reached for a file folder. In the hall closet, behind the winter coats, I kept a metal box with my important papers. The house deed, Robert's death certificate, my Social Security award letter, the warranty for the water heater that never worked the way it should. I spread everything across the dining table and smoothed the corners with my palm. The wood still had a pale ring from a Christmas candle Robert knocked over years ago, and for a moment the memory of his laugh came back so clearly it hurt. My bank statement was there too, unopened. I slid my finger under the flap like it might bite. I wasn't expecting anything dramatic, just the same small numbers, the same careful balancing act. But a line item caught my eye, printed in calm black ink, as if it were nothing at all. An auto-withdrawal. Monthly. The name beside it was not mine. I leaned closer until my glasses nearly touched the paper. It was a debit for Silver Pines Senior Living. $200. A deposit towards services, the reference code said. The first withdrawal had started 3 weeks ago. My chest tightened so sharply, I pressed my hand to it. It wasn't just a waiting list. Someone had tied my account to their plan. I thought about calling the bank right away. But my phone rang before I could pick it up. Susan's name lit the screen, cheerful and bright. My thumb hovered. Then I answered because I've never been good at letting calls go to voicemail. Like ignoring a ringing phone might invite bad luck. "Eleanor," she sang out. "How are you feeling today? How's the hip?" Her voice was warm, practiced. In the background, I heard clattering dishes and a child's cartoon, a life full of motion that always made mine feel quiet and slow. "I'm fine," I said. My own voice sounded far away. "Susan, did you put me on a waiting list for a retirement home?" There was a pause long enough for me to hear Daisy squeal at something on the TV. "Oh," Susan said, and that single syllable was heavy. "Michael didn't tell you?" "No," I said. "He promised to take care of me." Another pause, and then Susan's tone shifted into the one she used when she explained things to the cashier at the grocery store. That gentle firmness that leaves no room for argument. Eleanor, honey, it's not like that. It's just being proactive. Those places have long waits. We're just planning ahead. Planning? I repeated. I looked down at the bank statement again, at the neat little withdrawal. With my money? A sharper breath came through the line, almost like irritation. It's a small deposit. It holds your spot. And honestly, it's for your own good. You know Michael's schedule. He can't always run over there. And I'm juggling the kids. You wouldn't want to be a burden. The word burden landed in my kitchen like a dropped plate. For a moment, I saw myself through her eyes. An old woman in a modest house, slow on stairs, careful with groceries, needing rides to appointments. Useful when I did their budgeting. Invisible when I needed reassurance. I want to speak to Michael, I said. He's in a meeting, Susan answered too quickly, but he'll call you later. Don't worry yourself sick, okay? We're trying to help. She said it like I should be grateful, like my fear was an inconvenience. Then she added softer, You know we love you. After the call ended, my kitchen felt louder than before. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at nothing, and it made me think of how often we bark at shadows instead of the hand holding the leash. I sat down and stared at the withdrawal again. $200 wasn't the end of the world, but it was the beginning of one. It was the kind of amount people think you won't notice, the kind of quiet theft that wears a polite face. By late afternoon, Michael still hadn't called. I made myself eat half a grilled cheese sandwich and fed the other half to the trash because my stomach wouldn't take it. I stood at the window and watched the light change on the street, watched a mother pull her child along with one mitten missing, watched an Amazon van stop and go. The world had rules, schedules, deliveries. My life used to have those too. When the phone finally rang, it was Michael. His voice had that tired, stressed edge that always made me want to soothe him. It took everything in me not to fall back into my old role. Hey, Mom, he said, like nothing was wrong. Susan said you called. I received a letter, I replied, and I saw the withdrawals. Silence, then a sigh, deep and theatrical. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be. As if my life was a task on his list, something to complete between meetings. You did this without asking me, I said. You used my account. It's not like we cleaned you out, he snapped, and I heard Susan in the background, murmuring something I couldn't make out. It's a deposit, and it's a good place. Clean, safe. You'd have friends. I have friends, I said quietly, thinking of my church ladies and the librarian who always saved me a mystery novel when new ones came in. And I have my home. Michael's tone softened then, but it wasn't tenderness, it was strategy. Mom, you fell. You can't drive at night. You called me last month because the smoke detector wouldn't stop chirping. You need help. I needed help changing a battery, I corrected, not being filed away. Susan's voice rose in the background sharper now. Tell her she'll be closer to us. Tell her it's practical. Michael cleared his throat. Mom, listen. We've been talking. The kids are getting older, expenses are up, and we just can't do the full caregiver thing. You deserve professional support. There it was. Not love, not care. A decision made in a separate room, with my name in their mouths and no seat saved for me at the table. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles went pale. So your promise, I said, was only until it became inconvenient. He didn't answer that. He said, You're being emotional. That phrase has been used on women like me for generations, a neat little way to dismiss pain without having to touch it. I felt tears threaten, hot and quick. But something else rose up too, something steadier, a kind of cold clarity. I want the withdrawal stopped, I said. Immediately. Michael hesitated. We'll talk about it. No, I replied, surprising even myself. There's nothing to talk about. You didn't ask. You don't get to decide. Stop them. Susan's voice cut in, loud enough for me to hear clearly now. Eleanor, don't be dramatic. It's for your own safety. My own safety. Like I hadn't kept myself alive through grief and bills and lonely winters. Like I hadn't built a life with my own hands. I'm not being dramatic, I said. I'm being awake. Michael's breath came out hard. Fine. I'll look into it. He sounded like a man agreeing to fix a leaky faucet, not a man who'd just tried to move his mother out of her home. After we hung up, I stood very still in the quiet. My reflection in the dark window looked older than usual, lined and tired, but my eyes were clear. I realized something then that made my throat ache with both sadness and relief. They weren't doing this because they hated me. They were doing it because they'd gotten used to my silence. I picked up the letter again and traced the reference number with my fingertip. Then I opened my laptop, the one Michael had set up for me with big icons, and a password I still wrote on a sticky note. The screen glow lit my hands, thin-skinned and speckled with age spots. I typed in the name of the senior living facility and found their website, glossy and reassuring. There was a contact page, an email, a phone number. There were forms, there were policies, and for the first time since the letter arrived, I felt something besides shock. I felt the shape of a boundary forming, slow and firm, like a door being set back on its hinges. I slept badly that night, the kind of sleep that isn't rest so much as surrender. I drifted in and out, tangled in memories and half-thoughts, and every time I woke, the same sentence returned, quiet and persistent. They decided without me. In the early morning, before the sun fully rose, I padded into the kitchen and made coffee the way Robert used to like it, strong and plain. The house was still, except for the faint creak of the floorboards that had learned my weight over decades. I wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth seep into my fingers. Outside, the sky was pale blue, uncertain, like it hadn't made up its mind yet. That was when I realized I wasn't just hurt. I was embarrassed. There is a special kind of shame that comes with being treated like you've already disappeared. I thought about how confidently Susan had spoken, how easily Michael had sighed, as if my resistance were just another chore. I replayed old moments I'd brushed aside before. Susan correcting me in front of the kids, Michael scrolling through his phone while I talked, the way they both said, "Don't worry about it, Mom," whenever I asked too many questions. I had worried about being ungrateful. I had worried about being difficult. I had worried so much that I forgot to worry about myself. Have you ever realized too late that your kindness was being used as permission? Later that morning, I drove to the bank. I hadn't planned to at first, but my hands seemed to know where to turn the steering wheel. The building hadn't changed since the 90s, beige brick and a flag that snapped sharply in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and paper. The young teller smiled at me with professional cheer. Her name tag said Rachel, and she looked like she might be about the same age Michael was when he first learned to ride a bike. "I'd like to ask about an automatic withdrawal," I said, sliding my statement across the counter. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. She typed, nodded, frowned slightly. "This was authorized online," she said. "From your account." "I didn't authorize it," I replied. Rachel's smile softened into something more serious. "Then we can stop future withdrawals and file a dispute for the amount already taken." The words "future withdrawals" landed like a small mercy. She explained the process slowly, carefully, as if she understood that clarity matters when trust has been bruised. I signed my name twice, the pen heavy in my hand. When she handed me a printed confirmation, I folded it and put it in my purse like something valuable. Walking back to my car, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. Relief that something had been stopped. Grief that I had to stop it at all. Michael called that afternoon. His voice was clipped, irritated beneath the politeness. He said the bank had overreacted. He said Susan was upset. He said I should have talked to them first. I did talk to you, I answered. You didn't listen. There was a pause, then a sharp exhale. Mom, why are you making this into such a big deal? Because it was a big deal. Because it was my name, my money, my life. But I didn't say all of that. Instead, I said, because I'm still here. After the call, I sat at my dining table and looked at the stack of papers I'd begun collecting without quite meaning to. Bank confirmations, emails from the senior living facility that I hadn't replied to yet, old agreements I'd signed for Michael and Susan when they refinanced their house, trusting, unquestioning. I noticed how often my signature appeared and how rarely theirs did when it came to helping me. The pattern was suddenly very clear. That evening, my neighbor Carol knocked on my door with a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. She's widowed too, a retired nurse with sharp eyes and a habit of listening all the way to the end of a sentence. You look tired, she said gently when I let her in. So I told her. Not everything, but enough. The letter, the withdrawals, the promises that felt thinner now that I held them up to the light. Carol didn't interrupt. When I finished, she set the bread down and said, Eleanor, planning for care is one thing. Doing it behind your back is another. I felt tears sting my eyes then, unexpected and sudden. I keep wondering if I'm overreacting. She shook her head. You're reacting appropriately to being erased. That word stayed with me long after she left. That night, I opened my laptop again and read every policy on the senior living facility's website. I read about consent, about financial responsibility, about who could initiate an application. I printed pages and highlighted sentences, the way I used to prepare for school board audits. The calm returned as I worked, that old familiar steadiness that comes from knowing where the margins are. I wasn't plotting revenge. I wasn't angry in the way movies make anger look. I was something quieter and more dangerous to people who expect compliance. I was done being invisible. As I shut down the computer and turned off the light, a thought crossed my mind, soft but firm, and it stayed with me as I climbed into bed. If my own son could forget that I had a voice, then it was time I reminded everyone, including myself, that I still knew how to use it. The next few weeks settled into a strange, careful rhythm. On the surface, nothing dramatic happened. Michael didn't come over. Susan sent a few polite texts with heart emojis that felt borrowed. The house stayed quiet, but underneath that quiet, something in me was rearranging itself. I began paying closer attention to details I had once skimmed past. I checked my mail the day it arrived instead of letting it pile up. I logged into my bank account every morning with my coffee and reviewed each transaction like a ritual. I kept receipts in a small envelope instead of dropping them into the junk drawer. These were small acts, almost invisible, but they steadied me. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived from Silver Pines Senior Living. This one wasn't glossy. It was dense, full of forms and fine print. Someone had marked a few pages with yellow tabs, helpful and efficient. The return address was printed neatly, professional, and distant. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the table and wiped down the counters first, the way I always do when my nerves are tight. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint sweetness of the flowers Carol had brought over earlier in the week. When I finally sat down, I felt oddly calm. The paperwork was thorough. Medical history, financial disclosures, emergency contacts. My name appeared again and again, paired with boxes I hadn't checked and signatures that weren't mine. Michael's name was listed as primary family contact, his handwriting unmistakable in the margins. I felt a flicker of anger then, but it passed quickly, replaced by something colder and clearer. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a system, and systems can be navigated. I called the number on the letter. A woman answered, her voice smooth and practiced, the kind of voice trained to soothe concerns before they fully form. Silver Pines Admissions, this is Laura. My name is Eleanor Whitaker, I said. I received an application packet I did not request. There was a brief pause as she typed. I could hear the clicking of keys, the distant murmur of other voices. Yes, Mrs. Whitaker, we have you on our waiting list. Your son began the process. I did not consent to that, I replied, and I did not authorize the use of my financial information. Another pause, longer this time. I see, Laura said carefully. We usually work closely with families. I am the family, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She cleared her throat. In that case, we'll need a written request from you to withdraw the application. I'll send that today, I said, and I'd like confirmation in writing once it's done. Of course, she replied, sounding slightly flustered now. I'll email you the appropriate form. When the call ended, I sat back and stared at the wall for a moment. My heart was beating faster, but it wasn't fear. It was effort, like using a muscle that hadn't been exercised in years. I drafted the letter slowly, choosing each word with care. Clear, polite, firm. I stated that I had not authorized any application, that any financial information provided had been shared without my consent, and that I was formally requesting removal from the waiting list, effective immediately. I signed my name at the bottom, my handwriting steady. At the post office, the clerk stamped the envelope and slid me a receipt across the counter. I tucked it into my purse like a talisman. Proof matters. Paper remembers when people pretend not to. Michael showed up unannounced 2 days later. I saw his car through the front window and felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but I didn't rush to the door. I finished rinsing my mug, dried my hands, and then opened it. He looked tired, thinner, irritated in that way that has nothing to do with sleep. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glancing around as if assessing a space he assumed would soon be empty. Mom, he said, forcing a smile. We need to talk. We can, I replied. But you don't need to stand. That seemed to throw him. He sat at the table, tapping his fingers against the wood. Susan says you called the facility. I did. You embarrassed us, he said, frustration breaking through. They acted like we did something wrong. I met his eyes. You did. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. We were just trying to plan. You're not getting younger. I'm aware of my age, I said. What I'm not willing to accept is being managed without my knowledge. He leaned back, arms crossed, defensive now. So what? You're going to do everything alone? No, I said. I'm going to do things with consent. He stared at me, and for a moment I saw confusion flicker across his face. He wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't soften her words to protect his comfort. I withdrew the application, I continued. I stopped the withdrawals, and I'm reviewing every document I've signed in the past few years. His jaw tightened. Are you saying you don't trust us? I thought about all the years I'd trusted without question, about the signatures, the folders, the quiet assumptions. I'm saying trust needs transparency, I replied. He stood abruptly. Susan's not going to like this. I nodded. That's not my responsibility. When he left, the house felt different, not emptier, lighter, as if something heavy had been moved out without a sound. That night, I sat at my desk and made a list in my head, not of steps or plans, but of things I wanted to protect. My home, my finances, my dignity. The list wasn't written anywhere, but it was clear enough to guide me. For the first time in a long while, I went to bed without that familiar knot of worry in my stomach. The future was still uncertain, but it was mine again. And that, I realized as I turned off the light, was worth defending. After Michael left, I expected the silence to feel punishing. Instead, it felt deliberate, like a pause placed exactly where it belonged. Days passed without calls or messages, and I let them pass. I filled the time with things I'd neglected, not because I was busy, but because I'd been waiting. I started with the desk in the spare bedroom. It had become a resting place for old mail, instruction manuals, and photographs I couldn't quite bring myself to put away. I opened the window, let the late morning air in, and sorted through the piles slowly. There were birthday cards from Michael as a boy, his handwriting round and uneven. There were school programs with my name listed as room parent, church bake sale flyers with my handwriting at the bottom. Evidence of a life lived outward generously. Then there were documents I didn't remember signing, loan addendums, authorization forms, a power of attorney draft that had never been finalized but had my initials on every page. I sat very still as I read them, the way you sit still when you realize a noise in the house isn't the wind after all. None of it was illegal. That was the part that stung. Everything had been done just carefully enough, just politely enough to stay inside the lines. I had agreed to assist. I had agreed to temporarily allow. I had agreed because the language was soft and the people asking were my family. I made copies of everything and placed the originals back where they belonged. The copies went into a new folder, labeled in my neat, old-fashioned script. It felt important to name things clearly. Later that week, I drove to an attorney's office recommended by Carol's cousin. The building was low and unremarkable, tucked between a dental clinic and a dry cleaner. Inside, the walls were lined with framed diplomas and photographs of fishing trips. The attorney, Mr. Harlan, was around my age, with silver hair and a calm, unhurried way of listening. I told him my story without drama, just facts, letters, withdrawals, promises. He nodded slowly. "You're not the first parent this has happened to," he said, "and you won't be the last." We talked about boundaries, about revoking permissions I'd given too freely, about updating my will and medical directives so my wishes were clear and legally binding. He explained things plainly, without condescension, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was speaking to me instead of around me. When I left his office, I carried a folder heavier than the one I'd brought in, not with fear, but with clarity. Susan finally called a few days later. Her voice was tight, polite in a brittle way. "Michael says you've been seeing a lawyer." "I have," I replied. "Is that really necessary?" she asked. "It feels extreme." What felt extreme to me, I said, was discovering plans about my life I wasn't included in. She exhaled sharply. "We were trying to help." "I believe you believe that," I answered. "But help doesn't come without consent." There was a pause, and then something colder slipped into her tone. "You know this could affect how much time we can spend helping you in the future." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar, the quiet threat disguised as concern. "I understand," I said, and I did. After the call, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. The leaves were starting to turn, and the sidewalk was scattered with early fall debris. I passed houses where I'd once watched children grow up, where I'd held casseroles on doorsteps after funerals, where I'd laughed on porches during summer evenings. This place knew me. I wasn't ready to leave it. At home, I changed the passwords on my accounts. I canceled shared access where it wasn't necessary. I notified my bank, my doctor's office, even the pharmacy, that no one was authorized to make decisions on my behalf without my written approval. Each call was small, procedural, and strangely empowering. No one yelled. No doors were slammed. The world didn't end. What did end was the quiet assumption that my life was open for management. One evening, as I filed away the last confirmation email, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. My hair was thinner than it used to be, my shoulders a little more stooped, but my eyes looked steady, awake. I realized then that this wasn't about punishment or proving a point. It was about taking up the space I still occupied, fully and without apology. And as I turned off the lights and settled into my chair with a book, I felt something settle too. Not anger, resolve. The first cold snap came early that year. My joints complained before the weather report did. And the shadows in this old house sweat faintly at the corners. I spent an afternoon sealing drafts with foam tape and humming to myself, trying to keep my mind from wandering back to Michael's silence. Then, on a Friday, the doorbell rang just after noon. Through the glass, I saw Susan's shape first. Neat coat, neat hair, holding a large envelope like it was a gift. Michael stood behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes already tired. For a moment, my body reacted the old way, that reflex to straighten up, to make them comfortable. But I stayed exactly where I was, breathing slowly, and opened the door. "Mom," Michael said. He didn't step in this time. He waited, like I was the one who had changed the rules. Maybe I had. Susan smiled too brightly. "We brought lunch," she said, lifting a paper bag, "and we have something important to go over." The bag smelled like deli turkey and mustard. It should have felt familiar, comforting. Instead, it felt like camouflage. I let them in, because I'm not cruel, and because I wanted to see what was in that envelope with my own eyes. I set out plates, poured water into 3 glasses, and watched Susan place the envelope on my table with a careful little tap, as if she were filing me. "It's just paperwork," she said quickly. "Nothing scary." I didn't touch it yet. "Paperwork for what?" Michael cleared his throat. It's a durable power of attorney, medical too, just in case. It makes things easier if something happens." Susan leaned forward, voice soft. "Eleanor, no one's trying to take anything from you. It's just responsible. You know how hospitals are. They won't talk to anyone if things aren't on file." I stared at the envelope. I had filed enough documents in my lifetime to recognize the way people push papers when they want control without saying the word. My fingers curled around my glass, cold with condensation. "Who prepared this?" I asked. "A friend of ours," Susan said. "He's not a lawyer, but he knows forms. It's standard." Standard, the same word she'd used about the waiting list. I slid the envelope toward me and opened it slowly. Inside were printed pages, signature lines highlighted in yellow. Michael's name was already typed in as agent, Susan as alternate. There was a section about access to bank accounts, about the authority to sell property if necessary, about decisions made in the principal's best interest. I heard my own breathing, steady but loud in my ears. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started up, the low mechanical whine floating through the window like nothing in the world had changed. I looked up at Michael. "Did you read this?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. "Susan went through it," he said. "It's fine." Susan's smile tightened. "Eleanor, please don't make this into a fight. We're trying to protect you." Protect, plan, decision, standard. Helpful words, smooth as stones, meant to cover something sharp underneath. I took off my glasses and set them on the table. You tried to put me in a facility without telling me, I said, keeping my voice calm. You linked my bank account to payments I didn't authorize. Now you're asking me to sign papers that would let you make decisions for me, including financial ones. Michael's face flushed. Mom, it's not like that. Then explain it, I said. Susan's tone shifted, impatience leaking through. You're acting paranoid. That word landed harder than Burden had. Paranoid. As if my instincts were a symptom. As if reality was something I was imagining. Have you ever had someone call you dramatic or paranoid just because you finally started paying attention? I stared at the highlighted lines, and I felt something crack in me. Not loud, not messy, just a quiet splitting between who I used to be and who I could no longer afford to remain. I thought of Robert, how he'd always said, Ellie, your kindness is your strength, but don't let it become your cage. I hadn't understood him back then. I did now. I won't be signing this, I said. Susan's eyes widened. Eleanor, no, I repeated firmer. And I need you both to hear me clearly. I have already updated my legal documents with an attorney. My wishes are written down. They are on file. If something happens to me, you will not be improvising. Michael leaned forward, voice sharp with panic now. You saw a lawyer to cut us out? I saw a lawyer to include myself, I said. I'm not cutting you out of my life. I'm cutting you out of decisions you don't have the right to make. Susan's cheeks reddened. So what, you're punishing us? I looked at her, really looked. The neat lipstick, the controlled posture, the way she sat in my home like she owned the conversation. This isn't punishment, I said quietly. This is protection. Michael stood up, chair scraping the floor. Mom, you're making us the enemy. I didn't make you anything, I replied. I'm just refusing to pretend. There was a long silence. I could see it in Michael's eyes then, a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a while. Not anger, not even guilt. Fear, the kind of fear people feel when they realize the person they counted on to bend will finally stand straight. Susan gathered the papers quickly, stacking them with trembling fingers. Fine, she said, her voice thin. Do it your way. I will, I said. When they left, the house held the echo of their footsteps for a moment, then released it. I stood at the door after it shut, my hand resting on the knob, feeling my pulse slow. I went back to the kitchen and threw away the deli wrappers without eating. Then I sat at my table and wrote down everything that had happened while it was still fresh. The date, the time, the exact wording. I printed the call log from my phone account, the one that showed Susan's earlier threats about helping in the future. I didn't do it because I wanted a fight. I did it because I finally understood what my quiet had cost me. That night, the wind rattled the windows, and the house sounded older than usual. I lay in bed listening, not scared, just aware. In the dark, I pressed my palm to my chest and felt the steady beat there, stubborn and alive. They had wanted me small and manageable. But I was still here, and I was no longer asking permission to be. The next morning, I woke up with that sore, hollow feeling you get after an argument, like your body spent the night lifting something too heavy. I made oatmeal and ate it slowly at the table, staring at the spot where Susan's envelope had been. The sunlight looked the same as always, but I didn't. I could feel it in my shoulders, in the way my jaw held tension without my permission. Around 10, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. Account access updated. I hadn't done anything. My spoon paused halfway to my mouth. I logged in, and my stomach turned cold. A new, trusted user had been added to my online banking profile. The name was Michael's. For a moment, my mind went blank, like a radio losing signal. Then the noise rushed back in all at once. Questions, anger, disbelief. My hands trembled as I clicked through settings. It wasn't full ownership, not a joint account, but it was access. Visibility, the ability to view balances and transactions, the ability to request changes. I felt that old reflex to call him and plead, to ask why, to remind him I was his mother. But pleading is just another way to hand someone the steering wheel. Instead, I grabbed my purse and drove to the bank. The parking lot was half full, the same beige brick building, the same flag snapping in the wind. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of printer paper and floor polish. Rachel was at the counter again. When she saw my face, her expression shifted from polite to concerned. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said softly. "Are you okay?" "No," I replied, "but I will be." I explained what I'd seen. I handed her a printed screenshot of the access change, the timestamp still visible at the bottom. She frowned and called a manager. A man named Mr. Patel came out from the back office, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched low. He shook my hand and invited me into a small conference room with a round table and a bowl of mints. The room felt too bright, too clean, like it was designed to keep emotions outside. He listened as I spoke. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked, "Did you authorize anyone to be added as a trusted user?" "I did not," I said. He nodded, expression serious now. "Then we'll remove it immediately and open an investigation. We'll also place an additional security hold on your account for any profile changes." My throat tightened with relief, so sudden it almost felt like weakness. "How did it happen?" He glanced at his screen. "It appears the change was requested through the call center. Whoever called had correct identifying information." Of course they did. My son had known my birthday since the day I gave birth to him. He'd known my first pet's name, my maiden name, the street I grew up on. Those security questions weren't security at all when the person crossing your boundary was family. Mr. Patel slid a form across the table. "If you'd like," he said, "we can add a verbal passphrase to your account, something only you would know. Without it, no one can make changes, even if they have personal details." I thought for a moment and chose something simple but meaningful, a phrase Robert used to whisper when he thought I was sleeping, still standing. I left the bank with a printed confirmation in my purse and a shaking anger in my chest. Not wild anger, focused anger, the kind that knows where to go. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and stared at my phone. Michael's name was there, easy to tap. I didn't tap it. I called Mr. Harlan instead. His receptionist recognized my voice and fit me in that afternoon. When I arrived, his office smelled faintly of coffee and old books. He listened while I described the bank access change, my words clipped now, precise. He didn't look surprised. "This is why we document," he said. "You're doing the right thing." He advised me to send a formal cease and desist letter, not dramatic, not threatening, just clear. No one was to access my accounts, request changes, or represent themselves as acting on my behalf. The letter would go to Michael and Susan, certified mail with receipts. "It's a boundary in writing," he said. "It matters." Driving home, I felt exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the ticking sound as it cooled. My house looked small from the car, but it looked like mine. That evening, there was a knock on my door. I didn't expect anyone. When I opened it, there stood Officer Daniels, a local police officer I recognized from neighborhood events. He wasn't aggressive, but he was formal. The sight of his uniform made my heart lurch. "Mrs. Whitaker?" he asked. "May I speak with you for a moment?" I nodded and stepped aside. His boots made soft thuds on my entryway rug. He held a small notebook and a calm expression, like he'd done this 1,000 times. "I'm here because we received a welfare check request," he said. The words hit me like cold water. A welfare check. Someone had called the police to my home, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because they wanted the weight of authority to lean on me. My son? I asked. Though I already knew, Officer Daniels didn't confirm directly, but his eyes flickered in a way that told me enough. The caller expressed concern that you might be unable to care for yourself. They said you've been confused. Confused? That was the new story then. Not stubborn, not emotional, confused. It was a neat little word. A doorway into control. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to stay steady. "Officer, I'm not confused," I said. "I'm upset. There's a difference." He nodded slightly. "I understand." I invited him into the living room. I showed him the mail on my table, the neat stack of bills paid, the calendar with my appointments written in my careful handwriting. I offered him coffee. He declined politely. Then I did something I never thought I'd do with a police officer in my home. I showed him the letter from Silver Pines. I showed him the bank confirmations. I showed him the notes I'd written after Susan and Michael's visit, dated and specific. Officer Daniels scanned them, his expression shifting from neutral to thoughtful. "This looks like a family dispute," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry you're in it." "I'm sorry too," I answered. My voice softened for a moment, grief slipping through. "But I'm not helpless." He asked me a few basic questions, the kind designed to assess whether someone knows where they are, what day it is, who the president is. I answered without hesitation. The humiliation of it burned, but I didn't let it show. When he finished, he closed his notebook. "You're clearly oriented and capable," he said. "I'll note that." I exhaled slowly. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course." "If someone keeps sending officers to my home as a way to pressure me, so," I asked, "what can I do?" Officer Daniels looked at me for a long moment, weighing his words. "If it becomes harassment, you can document it and make a report," he said, "especially if there's a pattern." I nodded. Pattern. That word again. Because that was what this was, not a single misunderstanding. A repeated attempt. After he left, the house felt too quiet. I stood in the doorway and watched his patrol car pull away. The sun was setting, painting the street in orange light. Somewhere down the block, children laughed, careless and loud. I went back inside and sat at my table. My hands were steady now. They had tried to turn my boundaries into evidence of confusion, and they had brought authority to my door, thinking it would make me fold. But all it did was make me certain. I picked up my pen, wrote down the time Officer Daniels arrived, what he said, what I showed him, and what he concluded. Then I placed the page into my folder. I wasn't building a case because I wanted to destroy my son. I was building it because I refused to be destroyed by silence. After the police car disappeared at the end of the street, I stayed at the window longer than necessary. My reflection hovered faintly in the glass, layered over the quiet neighborhood, and for a moment, I barely recognized the woman looking back. She seemed older than 67, but steadier too, like something fragile had finally hardened into bone. That night, I barely slept, not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop arranging things. Memories, documents, words people had used so casually. Confused, paranoid, for your own good. I realized they had begun building a story about me long before I noticed, one where my resistance was proof of decline. In the morning, I made a decision that felt both heavy and inevitable. I called Adult Protective Services. The woman who answered spoke calmly, without urgency or judgment. I explained that false concerns had been reported about my well-being, that financial boundaries had been crossed, and that I wanted everything documented properly. Not as a complaint, as a record. She asked thoughtful questions. Did I feel safe in my home? Yes. Did anyone have legal authority over my finances or medical care? No. Had I experienced pressure to relinquish control? I paused before answering, then said the truth. Yes. She told me they could open a voluntary file, one that documented my capacity and my wishes. An assessment. Neutral. Protective in the way systems are meant to be, not the way people twist them. A week later, a caseworker named Denise came to my house. She was my age or maybe a few years younger, wore sensible shoes, and carried a tablet instead of a clipboard. She looked around my living room without judgment, noticed the calendar on the wall, the pill organizer neatly labeled, the checkbook balanced on the side table. We sat at the dining table, sunlight warming the wood between us. She asked me questions, not just about dates and names, but about my routines, who I called when I felt lonely, how I handled emergencies, what I wanted my future to look like. No one had asked me that last question in a long time. I want to stay here, I said simply. As long as I can, and when I can't, I want to be part of the decision. Denise nodded. That's reasonable. She completed her assessment, typing quietly, occasionally glancing up to meet my eyes. When she finished, she told me she found no indication that I was unable to care for myself or make informed decisions. She said she would document the pattern of outside interference and note that future welfare checks should be viewed in context. Paper, again. Calm, powerful paper. After she left, I felt drained but lighter, like I'd finally stepped out of a shadow I hadn't known I was standing in. Michael called that evening. His voice was different now, careful. Mom, did you call Adult Protective Services? Yes, I said, a sharp inhale. Why would you do that? So the truth would exist somewhere other than between your wife and my silence. That makes us look bad, he snapped. I closed my eyes. No, Michael, your actions did that. There was a long pause, thick with things neither of us wanted to say. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. You didn't have to go this far. I thought of the police officer in my living room, the bank alerts, the forms slid across my table like traps. You went far first, I replied. Susan's voice appeared suddenly on the line, sharp and uninvited. You're humiliating us. I felt something settle in me then, not anger, not sadness, finality. I am protecting myself, I said. If that feels like humiliation, maybe ask why. They hung up on me, or maybe I hung up on them. I'm not entirely sure. The days that followed were strangely peaceful. No calls, no texts, no sudden envelopes. I attended my book club at the library and drank weak coffee with women who talked about novels and grandchildren and arthritis. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, my hands clumsy but eager. I laughed more than I expected to. One afternoon, a certified letter arrived. I recognized Susan's handwriting immediately, tight and angular. Inside was a single page, carefully worded, defensive. It said they were concerned about escalating misunderstandings and hoped we could resolve things privately. Privately, in the dark, where things could be rewritten. I didn't respond. Instead, I added the letter to my folder and updated my timeline. Dates, actions, outcomes. I noticed how calm my handwriting had become. How even. A week later, Denise called to follow up. She told me there had been another inquiry about my welfare, but because of the file, it had been noted and closed without action. She said, "You did the right thing by getting ahead of this." After the call, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the light fade. Leaves scraped softly across the sidewalk. A man down the street practiced trumpet. Badly, persistently. Life went on, imperfect and stubborn. For the first time since the letter from the retirement home arrived, I felt something close to peace. Not because my son had apologized, not because everything was repaired, but because the narrative had shifted. I was no longer the quiet problem to be managed. I was the documented truth. And as the evening cooled and the house behind me settled into its familiar sounds, I understood something with absolute clarity. They could try to rewrite me all they wanted, but I had finally written myself into the record. Time has a way of smoothing sharp edges, but it also reveals what was underneath all along. Weeks passed after everything settled into official records and quiet confirmations. No more surprise calls, no more envelopes slid across my table. Michael stayed distant, Susan stayed silent, and I stayed here. My days grew fuller in small, ordinary ways. I learned how to mix colors in my watercolor class, how blue and yellow could become something softer if you didn't rush them. I met Ruth there, a retired postal worker with a dry sense of humor and a bad knee. We started getting lunch afterward, comparing notes on soup specials and doctors who actually listened. I began volunteering one morning a week at the library, repairing old books with careful hands. Funny how patience returns when it's no longer being exploited. One afternoon, Michael finally came alone. No paperwork, no speeches prepared. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but unsure, like a man who had tried to move something heavy and discovered it wouldn't budge. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said, sitting across from me. I nodded. Neither did I, but it did. He stared at his hands. "I thought I was helping," Susan thought. "We thought we were being responsible." "I know," I said, and I meant it. "But responsibility without respect turns into control." He swallowed. "I'm scared, Mom, of losing you, of doing this wrong." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw not a villain, but a frightened man who had mistaken authority for love. "I'm scared too," I said softly. "That's why I need my voice." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. But when he left, he hugged me carefully, like someone learning the shape of something new. It wasn't a happy ending. It was an honest one. The house remains mine. The routines are mine. The future is still uncertain, but it's no longer being drafted in rooms where I don't sit. I've learned that dignity isn't something you age out of. It's something you defend quietly, with receipts and records, and the courage to say no. Have you ever noticed how freedom doesn't arrive loudly? It comes in moments like balancing your own checkbook again, or answering the door without fear, or realizing you're no longer shrinking to make someone else comfortable. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evening and watch the light fade, I feel something steady inside me. Not bitterness, not triumph, peace, the kind that comes from knowing where you stand. If my story stayed with you, thank you for listening all the way through. If it meant something, consider liking and subscribing so more stories like mine can be told. And tell me this honestly from your own life and your own heart. If you were in my place, what would you have done?